Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We'll get started. Welcome to the 2025 Politifest Solutions Showdown. It's great to be here with you today. In case you're not familiar with us, Voice of San Diego is a nonprofit investigative news organization committed to holding public officials accountable and giving you, the public, the information you need to be advocates for good government. As a nonprofit, we depend on members, donors, and sponsors like you to make our work possible. Thank you for your support. I'd like to take a minute to recognize our sponsors who helped make Politifest possible. A special thanks to the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of San Diego for being our partner for the 8th year. Our thanks also to the Sequan Band of the Kumeyaay Nation, Mark Nelson, and Nelson Stakeholder Consulting, the San Diego Foundation, Hitsky Development, Intesa, the Previs Foundation, First Five San Diego, and AARP. We'd also like to recognize KPBS and iNewsSource, our partners in public matters. We are partnering to share content, conversation, and events like Politifest to ensure all San Diegans understand their opportunity to participate in the democratic process, and that it means more than voting in an election. During these sessions, if you're unable to attend any of the other sessions in person, we'll be posting the recordings to the Politifest page of our website next week. We welcome your questions. Please use the Slido app. You can scan the QR code here with your phone. It'll take you to the website where you'll be able to submit questions and also vote. I'd recommend voting at the end of the panel so you can hear all of the solutions. If you are having trouble with the QR code in any way, we have volunteers around, so please raise your hand. Someone can come by and help you. You can also tweet along with the session and share your experience by using hashtag Politifest2025 on social media. And please tag us on Instagram and Facebook. Now, allow me to introduce our moderator, Jakob McWhinney, who is the education reporter at Voice of San Diego.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming out. I know there's a lot of exciting panels like water going on right now, so we don't take it lightly that you chose here. So I want to just talk a bit about education. Education has long been hailed as kind of the great equalizer in society, right? A way to ensure that no matter a kid's background, they have the knowledge and the tools and the skills they need to succeed in whatever comes next after, high school. The disappointing thing, though, is that education itself is far from equal. Wide achievement gaps exist on a whole variety of metrics, whether that's test scores, graduation rate, even stuff like suspension rates and expulsion rates. And far too often, a student's socioeconomic background or the neighborhood in which they grew up is the determining factor of how they end up performing and whether or not they're prepared after high school. So how do we fix that? It's a big and tricky question, and one that I do not pretend to have an answer to, but I have 3 people here who think they might. And so we are going to see what they have to say. First here on the left is Richard Barrera, Vice President of the San Diego Unified School Board and current candidate for the California Superintendent, State Superintendent of California. Then we have Scott Davison, who is the Parent Association Director. He is an activist and works on parent issues. And then lastly, we have David Miyashiro, who is the Superintendent at Cajon Valley Union School District. The goal here is to listen to them, listen to what they have to say, listen to their solutions about how we can ensure that every single kid receives the education that they need, and that every single kid receives an education that will allow them to succeed and excel after school. So first, we're going to hear from Richard, and he's going to take us through his presentation here.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jacob. And I've got, like 5 minutes?
You have 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
That's another thing I wanted to mention. Each person has 10 minutes. I'm going to set a timer here, so it will go off. I will stop you at 10 minutes. I'm going to be pretty ruthless about it, but I'll warn you at 2 minutes and I'll warn you at 1 minute, okay?
Great. Thanks so much, Jacob. So as I think about this answer, and I apologize to people, I know we've got a PowerPoint. I am just constitutionally incapable of reading PowerPoints, so I'm just going to kind of talk, and I think we've got some charts up here that I think back up some of the points that I want to make. I think of two stories that just in the last month, have been present on my mind. So one is we had a big convening in San Diego of the Latino School Boards Association. So board members from throughout California, came to San Diego, and so we were there to welcome them. And the main welcome for them was a mariachi ensemble from Logan Memorial Educational Campus. And by the way, this was, I think it's 7 a.m. And so our kids were up and ready to go and in uniform with their instruments. But the main thing was the pride with which they were performing and welcoming people from throughout the state to their city. Confident young people who 2 years ago, none of them had ever picked up a musical instrument. And now they're, performing in front of a live audience. And again, 7 a.m, these are kids who get up in the morning and actually look forward to coming to school because they've got adults that are there who can support them, and they've got programs and resources that are exciting and that they want to be a part of. And then I think just a few days before that, before the welcome to San Diego from the Logan Memorial students, I was out at Mountain Empire School. So a small, David knows well, a small school district in the East County on the border. And an incredibly hardworking superintendent, hardworking staff, 1,800 students in the district. None of the schools in the district have potable drinking water, not one. When it rains in the community, the high school floods every time, and the students are used to the drill of going and grabbing mops, out of the closet, and that's part of their school day. And there was a fire in the locker room because an electrical wire short-circuited and burned students' backpacks. And I just think of the difference between the experience that those students at Mountain Empire are having and the experience that students in Logan Memorial are having. And Logan Memorial, and Jacob has written a lot about this, when I first came onto the school board, I'm in my 17th year, I had parents in the community coming to me and saying, we want to create K-8s at every school surrounding Memorial because we don't want to send our kids to Memorial because the quality of the school facilities alone is sending a message to us as parents that we don't care about your kids. And we're not putting our kids there. And so we'd rather have our kids get on a bus, go across town, and be at a school in La Jolla or Point Loma than sending our kids to the school across the street. And the taxpayers of San Diego, when presented with the opportunity to invest in our young people, have said yes again and again and again and again. In the time that I've been on the school board, we've passed 4 facilities bond measures for a total of $11.5 billion. That's actually larger than the entire state's bond program, including a $200 million investment in Logan Memorial. And now families are very interested in sending their kids across the street to Logan Memorial. And we see growth in the middle school. The high school is about to have its first graduating class, including members of the mariachi ensemble. The difference is all about investment. California, a generation ago, 2 generations ago, Californians made a decision that we are going to invest in our public schools. So as our economy came out of the post-war economy and you had a growing middle class in California, that generation of Californians said the most important thing that we can do as we're moving into a better situation ourselves is to invest back in our public schools. And so the investment in not only our K-12 system, but our community colleges, our Cal State system, our University of California, really made California the envy of the world in terms of the public education system that our parents left my generation with. My generation has squandered that investment. So today, a lot of people are bragging about the fact that California has the 4th largest economy in the world. The reality is, when you compare California in terms of the investment of the wealth in the state, the GDP in the state back into public schools, we rank near the very bottom of all the states in the country. There are so many issues, and I look forward to David's done amazing, innovative work at Cajon Valley around career pathways. There are so many bright spots, so many examples of what's possible for our students, even as the issues facing our students become more and more challenging in terms of economic inequality, racism, the assault that we're seeing from this federal government. But the examples are all around us of what's possible. And what is very possible is that the 4th wealthiest economy in the world can make sure that the kids in Mountain Empire have access to potable drinking water, have the kind of facility that their students deserve, just as San Diegans made that decision to invest in the Logan Memorial community. Our opportunity to be the generation that rebuilds a sense of responsibility and investment back into our public schools will make the difference between us continuing to have these same conversations of under-resourced schools, despite the fact that we see exciting things happening all around us, but we can't take those strategies to scale. We have the opportunity as a generation of Californians to invest our wealth back into the public schools that created that wealth in the first place, and make it so the next generation and the following generations that are growing up know that they have access to the best public education system in the world. So many, many exciting strategies all around us, but at the core, the question for us as Californians is, are we going to commit ourselves to invest in our public schools, or are we going to let our public schools flounder and continue to see these massive differences in the experience of young people coming up through our schools?
You have 2 minutes left.
I'll stop there.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, Richard, appreciate it. We have Scott up next. I'm assuming you probably want to use
my slides.
Okay.
I'll take Richard's 2 minutes.
Thank you.
All yours. Hi, my name. Let's see if I might just pick this up. Wow, let's touch. All right. My name is Scott Davison. I'm the executive. Jacob actually had my old title. I used to be part of the Parent Association. That was when I got involved in education about 5 years ago. I'm now the executive director of the Carlsbad Education Alliance, which is essentially a watchdog group for Carlsbad Unified. So our core mission is accountability, transparency, and academic excellence in the Carlsbad Unified School District. I'm one of those pandemic parents, right? I got involved 5 years ago because we had, what I think pretty much everybody in this room would agree was the biggest crisis in the history of public education. We failed at that challenge. We failed that crisis. And, I think that, it's almost universally agreed at this point that we failed that crisis. Our schools closed, early on and were the first things to close. They were the last to reopen. We've seen a generation of students that were harmed as a result of that and have not been able to recover at this point. So my solution is getting at the heart of what that problem was and why that problem existed. And that's because in public education today, the people who are running public education, whether it's school boards or the organizations that are involved, they prioritize adults over students. And so I'm going to get into a very specific, nuanced example of that. And I appreciate the Voice of San Diego allowing, somebody like me to come up and present kind of the alternate view on what you typically hear when you talk about public education issues. So my solution is to prohibit teachers' unions from contributing to school board campaigns. That's a very specific issue. I'll get into exactly why and what the evidence is. But the main three outcomes would be that you force school boards to focus on students instead of adults. The data shows that all student outcomes will improve. And even though you would think, oh, well, teachers' unions no longer control, that means you're going to cut a bunch of staff salaries and cut a bunch of teacher salaries. No, we can actually increase teacher pay as a result as well. So long time ago, a teacher decided, and I'm just making this story up, but a long time ago, a teacher said, you know what if I ran for my school board and I wanted to serve on my own school board? I could then vote on my own raises. So I don't know if this actually happened, but eventually they created a state law that said you can't be a teacher in your school district and serve on your school board because you can vote on your own raises. So what do the teachers do? Well, they said, hey, let's organize into a union, and then we'll just fund a candidate and endorse a candidate to sit on the school board and represent our interests instead and still vote for our raises, right? So they just kind of created a little loophole to get around this law that prohibits conflicts of interest with teachers. So that's the current situation that we're in right now. And so does this work? Absolutely it works. It works phenomenally well. In fact, I challenge you to find an elected office that that has a better chance of winning than a teachers union endorsed candidate for school board. So there's statistics. These are California specific statistics that if you are endorsed by the teachers union, you have a 75% chance of winning your election. And in most cases, like in Carlsbad Unified, this other 75% chance or 75% statistic comes from Carlsbad Unified, where in a recent school board race, 3 of the candidates that were endorsed by the union also had 75% of their campaigns funded by the union. So it's a campaign in a box, right? You just raise your hand, you say, I'll represent the teachers union interests. You get an endorsement, you get, funding, and then you're off to the races. Now, the trifecta is if you actually are a teacher and you can put teacher on your ballot designation, then it basically becomes a 100% chance of winning. So the problem is it started to work a little bit too well. And so the first example we have is an article from Voice of San Diego from 2000 when my co-panelist right here, Richard Barrera, ran for school board and, basically had, the only money that was flowing into the campaigns was from the teachers union. So there was really no other opposition. In fact, I think 2020 might have been the only time you actually had an opponent. The rest of the time you run unopposed. So there's so much money coming from the teachers union that there's really no incentive for anybody else to even try and fund a candidate or get behind a candidate who represents different interests other than what the teachers union is pushing. The second example up here is a Poway school board member, Darshana Patel, who ran for state assembly last year. And if you can see, up close, and I'll just describe it if you can't, there's just a litany of endorsements and obviously funding coming from basically all of the different educator unions throughout the state that basically funded her campaign. And so once you kind of get that union endorsement, and Richard, I'm sure, can talk about that when he's going to run for state superintendent. Once you get that teachers union endorsement, it's a lock in terms of your ability to win that race. Now, the far right example is an example of how much power teachers unions have in the state and how they're willing to wield that even when it seems like it doesn't advantage them. So last year, there was a state assembly member, Josh Newman, who was running for re-election. He was an incumbent Democrat, but because he had voted against one of a bill that an educators union wanted, he voted against their interests. They spent $1 million to get him out of office. And they actually ended up with a Republican who is against unions in that seat. But they were so angry that he didn't represent their interests that they were willing to throw him out of office just to prove a point about how much power they have. So we've kind of seen a shift where, hey, it seems like, we should let the teachers unions, influence who's on the board and who's in our state, offices, but you can see how much abuse of power you end up with as a result. Now, this should be a pretty easy answer. Who benefits from this current system? Teachers, right? So there's the same study that I referenced earlier said, for every teacher you put on a school board, you get a 2 to 3% increase in teacher salaries. So it seems pretty obvious. The more teachers you get, the more they're going to vote for teacher salaries and raises. There's some fringe benefits. In Carlsbad Unified, they tried to vote on a policy to provide the teacher that serves on our district with extra paid leave to take off time from her job as a teacher in another district. Our district was going to pay for her district to give her paid time off. So you couldn't get that if you had a full-time job like me as an attorney or, as a, secretary, but if you're a teacher, you get special benefits. And then certainly one of the biggest conflict of interest is that teachers often have, if they're sitting on the school board, you're involved in the negotiations that your school district is handling with your teachers union. And so it's very difficult to determine and prevent a teacher from then leaking, the information, confidential information on union salaries and benefits and what the teachers are being offered in closed session, and keep that confidential. So the teachers are obviously highly likely to be talking to the other teachers and talking about what the union is offering, what the school district is offering, and providing kind of an insider look at those negotiations. So who doesn't benefit? Well, again, unfortunately, it's students. So the same studies that found that for every teacher you put on the school board, the salaries go up, also found that test scores for students go down. The other priority that the unions have been pushing recently is to get rid of standardized test scores. So they don't like standardized tests because it compares students to other students, whether they're in California or outside of the state of California. They don't like these standardized tests because it really shows whether or not our schools are improving or not. And recently in California, it's been a not, right? And one specific example up here is a literacy bill that was going to mandate the science of reading. Very evidence-based approach, has been working throughout the country. The CTA actually opposed the bill simply because it required extra training for teachers, and they didn't like that. So it finally kind of got pushed through the year later, but that just shows you that, most cases the unions represent the adults, they represent their members, they don't represent students. So what's the solution? Solution is prohibit teachers unions from funding school board campaigns. So it's a very, like I said, it's a nuanced approach. I'm not against unions existing.
2 minutes, just really quick.
Perfect. So I'm not against, teachers unions from existing or even being able to negotiate for their benefits. I'm just saying they shouldn't be able to elect their own bosses. So how would that work? There's two ways that I have up here. Plan A would be that you turn a teachers union into a 501c3, just kind of a nonprofit where they exist for their own benefit, but they're not allowed to endorse candidates for races. They're not allowed to spend money to run candidates for office. So that would be one plan. Plan B, I actually call this the Richard Barrera Plan B, which is that if a trustee is elected by the union, they're not allowed to vote on the union's interests. So anything that the union wants or would benefit
1 minute.
they wouldn't be able to vote on it. The reason I call that the Barrera plan is because Richard actually had a conflict of interest with his labor council relations maybe 10 years ago, I don't know, and was not able to vote or was told not to vote on those interests. So, couple quick examples as I wrap up. They did this in Wisconsin in 2011. The results came in and showed that student outcomes improved. The biggest gains were experienced by the lowest income students. So we're talking about raising performance for all students. That's exactly what happens. Second example, Houston Independent School District was taken over by the state of Texas to weaken the teachers union influence. They eliminated over 100 failed schools. The worst schools improved the most. They assigned the best teachers to the lowest performing kids. They instituted merit-based pay. So to conclude, why should we prohibit teachers unions from funding school board campaigns? It improves outcomes, benefits all students, and it forces school boards to prioritize kids over adults. Thanks.
All right, so thank you, Scott. We have David up next.
I'm going to start my time at the same time, Jake. Okay, hold on. It's true that there are 90 slides in 10 minutes, down from 150. Is that not a fact?
It is true.
Okay,
This is one
so-
of my motivations to have a loud timer. Okay, here I'm giving it start. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
Okay.
All right.
All right. So for context, actually over 20 years ago, I took over as a first-year principal of one of the worst performing schools in the state of California. Back then, it was no index. There was the API, Academic Performance Index. Richmond's API was 521. Really awful. So they fired the assistant principal. They fired the principal. They brought in rookie principal, me, coach, put me in. And he said, Superintendent, David, your job is to win this game, the hockey stick game. Get your school out of program improvement as a laser-like focus on test scores. And we did. Over the next 4 years, we did so well that the Orange County Register came in and profiled us. We went from 521 API to over 800 in a matter of 4 years. Our kids did so well that they sent proctors from California because they thought our teachers were cheating. That's how well our kids did. We were the San Diego Padres of standardized testing. Future tense, we're gonna win it. Okay, too soon, right? Okay. But, looking back at the achievement, the adults celebrated, the district gave us a party, and we were all excited. Later that year, Sharon Ramirez, sixth grade teacher, came in bawling in my office, tears, because one of our students, Norma, had gone to Texas to have her baby. And she was back in eighth grade with a child, preemie, and proud of it because her mother had her when she was that young. And in a staff meeting, she said, David, we have narrowed the curriculum down to get our kids test ready, and they're still getting pregnant. They're still dropping out of high school. They're still going to generational gangs. What are we doing in the name of federal accountability? And it started to change the conversation. And we thought about, well, what game are we playing? Well, the game was designed by these 10 men, the Committee of 10. In 1892, they were university heads. They designed it in their interest. 12 years of schooling, 8 elementary, 4 high school, standardized curriculum, agrarian calendar, because they wanted every student to come into the university with the same skill set, same knowledge, same everything. That's where standardization came from. And so we've been playing this game for over 120 years. Still looks the same in most places. No Child Left Behind was replaced by the California dashboard. Same metrics. And how is that working for us? Well, these are the successful kids. These are the kids that graduated from high school, completed a FAFSA, went to university, and now can't pay off their student loan debt. Unemployed and underemployed. San Diego-based data, Opportunity Youth. 40,000 kids aged 16 to 24 not working and not in school. And this is a national problem. Interestingly, Raj Chetty's data talks about zip code destiny. So the ability for a child to outperform or out-earn their parent, and the idea that if a child's born into poverty, they're going to stay in poverty. Well, what did the kids say about that?
On file all day. Oh, it's fine. We have millions. I want to be a yes man. Yes, woman. Yes, sir. Coming, sir. Anything for the ladies, sir. When I grow up, I want to be underappreciated. We're doing the same job. I'm forced into early retirement.
Those actually are not Cajon Valley kids. They belong to the Powell Unified School District. Just kidding. But we don't accept that. We don't accept that El Cajon is a high poverty place, that our kids are going to stay in poverty moving into adulthood. So we've looked at different things. The Economic Development Corporation here in San Diego produced this data statistic. Future workforce are the 600,000 students in San Diego across the 42 school districts. And the innovation economy are the people in high-wage, high-demand jobs here in San Diego. It doesn't match. In Cajon Valley, we now have over 40 languages spoken. We are beautifully diverse with a large refugee population. Interestingly, Cajon Valley, our white demographic are also English learners. If you look at our statistics, mostly from the Middle Eastern and North Africa. So we know that talent is equally distributed, but opportunity is not. My solution is not to incrementally improve a broken system. You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the other obsolete. We need a new operating system completely. Public education is not designed for well-being after high school. And so in our district, we have a vision of happy kids, healthy relationships on a path to gainful employment. Happiness we define as kids that are self-aware, have self-esteem and self-efficacy. The belief that their hard work will result in something positive for their future. Healthy relationships, not just between the kids, but all the adults in the building. And path to gainful employment is a vocational identity. We started measuring these things with the Gallup Student Engagement Poll that measures engagement, hope, and career financial well-being. And we started to see some different things. In Cajon Valley, we began with digital curriculum. So it started as a cost savings, but what we were able to do is change the learning model to blended learning, where kids are getting actionable data in real time, not waiting for the end of year test. TEDx Kids at El Cajon is another curriculum that we're able to implement. This is Jose as a first grader. Yeah, TEDx, here's Jose.
So you see you like that. No, seriously. Take one of the police.
And then in fourth grade, he's in front of President De La Torre at San Diego State.
For years, there has been a soup issue in our border between San Diego and Tijuana that have prevented us from enjoying our beaches.
They're talking about that in the other room. And I told Jose, I use you in my presentations. He said, that's okay, Dr. Miyashiro, I use you in my presentations too. He wasn't lying. But what we saw is that as we started to have kids tell their story, to take stage, to be authentic, it was more than just presentation literacy, it was a social emotional learning curriculum.
Are you false? These are the type of questions I get when I wear my hijab.
And then Iraqi Christians in the same classroom. Imagine how the relationships form when kids get to know each other's story. Bar mitzvahs, bat mitzvahs. I'm going to have to skip through some of these because I'm going to run out of time. Another curriculum that we have is the world of work. And Ed Hidalgo, he used to be our Chief Innovation Officer, built on the top floor of Qualcomm, the Think of It Lab. You might have been there. It's a one-day experience where kids get to try on careers, exploring their strengths, interests, and values. Another partner is Junior Achievement. I'm on their board. And this is BizTown, where kids in fifth grade get to go be part of the professional system there. And we took the curriculum, those two one-day experiences, and designed our own K through 12 career development curriculum aligned with the San Diego Workforce Partnership priority sectors. You can see it in our classrooms. We built our own curriculum, physical and digital, basically to close the gap between education and the world of work. And with modern curriculum, one more TED Talk, this is Benotia when she first came to our country.
It's the most difficult thing in the world because you get to anything for your future and you only waste time and wait.
Now stop it and play Benotia 8 years later.
Having a TED Talk at the age of 11 as a newcomer to the United States was and still is one of my biggest accomplishments so far. Today, I'm attending the new high school established by our district, where we have the opportunity to explore our abilities. In addition, we choose our career path through the World of Work program that we started to take.
She could give this talk. And so Bostonia Global was born in 2020. This is what our high school looks like. Our kids leave to learn. Not just some kids. There's not CTE pathways. It's not a career pathway. Every child, every grade, every year has advisory and work-based learning. Those are employees in our district. We have 3,000 employees, so we're our first mentors. Every child's a pathway. And the solution is already in construction by Carnegie and ETS, who built our modern system. This is Tim Knoll's slide. The president of Carnegie said, the transcript has been the same forever. Tim Knowles, Laura Slover from ETS, Katie Jenner from Secretary of Education from Indiana, on a panel where she talked about Indiana's pathways based on the Swiss model. In Switzerland, 70% of all high school students are in paid youth apprenticeships. The other 30 are on an academic track. And it's fluid. You can go in and out. In Indiana, they've taken that and they built that into their system. By ninth grade, every student is on a plan to be enrolled in the military, be enrolled in post-secondary, enlisted in the military, or employed. And so just like in Switzerland, with the help of intermediaries and philanthropy, they have the ability to have students earn high school credit, college credit, and income starting sophomore year. We've taken that. We built that into our program. Here's Bostonia Global. I won't play the video. It's great. Linda McMahon, Secretary of Education, posted this weeks after her appointment about Swiss apprenticeship. So there's hope. We're the fourth largest economy. I have to update my slide. But the first largest bureaucracy. And there are some interesting things that can help us better. Flexibility waivers, Governor Newsom, and a shameless plug for Superintendent Richard Barrera. And with that in place, we can close the gap between education and the world of work.
Well, look at that. We have a little bit of news right here, right? David Miyashiro endorsing Richard Barrera. Okay, endorsement or not, I'm going to want you guys to mix it up here, okay? So the goal of this panel is to duke it out. My goal, my ideal is that I'm going to sit up here and twiddle my thumbs because you all will be engaging in each other's, ideas, presentations, solutions in a robust enough way where I won't have to do a damn thing. And what we really want you to do is trying to prove to our wonderful audience here that your solution to this perennial problem, which is that education is not equal and not all children have the opportunity for an excellent education, that your solution is the one that takes the cake. But to start it off, I do want to ask each of you a couple questions. So Richard, your solution seemed to be that we need to fund schools more. I didn't hear many specifics. Tell us how you would choose, how you think, where you think that money comes from, what you think that money goes toward.
Okay. What the money needs to go towards is everything that David just talked about. And what David, as we noticed, didn't spend a lot of time talking about was standardized test scores as the metric that we should be using to determine whether our schools are working or not. In fact, you were describing students' happiness, students' self-confidence, students' self-efficacy, and you've built systems that allow not just the school district, but classroom teachers to know, are we making progress in those areas? And, the exciting examples that, you showed us with your students and the revamping of really what it means to be an educated person that we're seeing in Cajon Valley. And I think that if Californians had a chance to look at what's possible with what David's doing. But again, we've got, these incredible examples up and down the state of what's possible. I think we're going to have the easiest campaign that we've ever had to go to voters and say, it's not okay for the fourth largest economy in the world to underinvest in our public schools. And in fact, if we invest in our public schools, we can create more and more opportunities like what we're seeing in Cajon Valley, which is, by the way, I'm a proud alumni of the Cajon Valley Union School District. But what we've been facing now for decades, certainly in California and across the nation, is the opposite narrative. And that narrative is, let's narrow down the definition of student achievement to what happens on a once-a-year standardized test. And when, guess what, students don't seem to be scoring proficient on these once-a-year standardized tests, that means our public schools are failing, and that's our excuse to disinvest from public education. That's what we've been seeing for 40 years in this state, and it's a narrative that began with the intention of disinvesting from public education. So if you create a framework that is guaranteed to produce a result that looks like students are not achieving, which again, if we were to apply that framework to Cajon Valley, there would be people who are arguing that Cajon Valley is not working for its students, when we just saw the opposite coming from David. So we need inspiring examples of what's happening in our public schools, including at Cajon Valley. And then we need to take those examples and we need to, again, go back to the voters in this state and say, are we willing to take the wealth that exists in this state and invest back into, so specifically, where does the money come from?
Yeah.
It comes from the people who have all the money. Right? We've seen enormous gaps in income inequality here in this state and across the country over the course of a generation. We could raise taxes on the wealthiest Californians in a way that would make substantial impact, positive impact to our public schools. They wouldn't even notice it because their accountants are, with the money that they've already got and invested, they'd overcome that in 3 weeks.
I think they'd notice it. That's why they're so rich. You know, one of the things that we often see when it comes to funding is that the correlation between funding at a state level and student performance, it exists, but it's not super strong. I mean, you look at New York, for example. New York State provides the most funding per pupil of any state in the country, and their students are still performing not very well. I mean, why do you think California would be different?
Well, I think there's a lot of successes already happening in New York. So the Economic Policy Institute just produced kind of a meta-analysis of scores of research that's been done over the last decade, looking at this question that you're asking about, does more investment make an impact on student outcomes? And the answer is unequivocally yes. No question. Study after study. And what's most important about that is it's not just dollar per pupil, it's percentage of an economy's wealth that, when invested back into public schools, makes very clear positive impact for students. It's not a question. The only people who try to argue that that's not the case are the same people who've been trying to move the money out of public schools going back decades. And whether that's just people who want their taxes cut or people who actually want those resources put back into the private system that they can benefit from, that narrative that more investment doesn't work doesn't resonate with people in California. Certainly doesn't resonate with people in San Diego. We've made the argument for, going back 17 years. Are you willing to raise your property taxes to invest in our schools? And they've said yes every single time. And we have seen our outcomes significantly improve over that time in San Diego Unified. So again, let's not get wrapped up into a narrative that people who don't have the best interests of our students in mind have tried to create. Let's take examples of what David and others are creating throughout the state, and let's go to the voters and say that's possible if we provide the investment that we should.
Scott, I saw you shaking your head. Give it to me straight.
Yeah. I mean, everything that Richard said, I 100% disagree with. You can look at the data and show that the more money you spend on education does not correlate to better outcomes. I mean, the most recent example that we saw was Mississippi, which is chronically underfunded, but they just switched to the science of reading, and they actually ended up outperforming, California and every other state on literacy after just a few years, because they implemented a system of teaching literacy that works. You didn't need more money, you just needed a better system, and you needed the ability to implement a system that works, and you needed, the adults in the room to prioritize the kids and not unions and adults. And so that's, the example I gave of the CTA opposing the exact legislation that Mississippi implemented. Mississippi surged ahead without any extra funding and is chronically underfunded compared to California, and saw massive success, whereas California has not. The specific example in San Diego, San Diego Unified and pretty much every school district in the state of California, including Carlsbad Unified, which is one of the best in the county, has not recovered after the pandemic, right? Our student test scores have not recovered after the pandemic, despite hundreds of billions of dollars in investments in learning recovery, right? Like all of these billions of dollars that we got from the state government, that we got from the federal government, were specifically intended to mitigate that learning loss, right? But it's not the amount of money, it's how that money is spent and what it's spent on. And so the key to my solution is make sure that the people who are spending the money are spending it on the right things that actually drive improved outcomes, and not just saying we just need more money and we'll figure it out, because that has been proven to not succeed. We have 25 states in the country now that are looking at and implementing merit-based pay, because they understand that what we want to do is incentivize teachers to teach better and to teach students who are struggling. And we're not just looking at test scores, right? It's like, we're looking at whether or not students are improving, and not just whether or not they have a certain score. So we're rewarding school districts and learning systems that actually show outcomes that improve. And the final thing I'll kind of say about that is, when you look at, this idea of career, and we can get into this in a little bit, is that, my contention is what we should be focusing on is making sure that every graduate of our public school system is at least proficient in literacy and math, because it doesn't matter what you do after that, right? If you have basic critical thinking skills, you have a basic proficiency in English and math, you can go into any career. It doesn't matter if you go to college or not. The smartest person I ever worked for never graduated from college, never even went to college, because you can be prepared from a basic public school education. So we should be investing in public school education. We should, if we need more resources, we can put in more resources. But at this point, we've shown that you don't need more money. You just need to be able to spend it better and have people that are in charge who are spending it on kids and not adults.
Scott, so teachers inevitably want kids to learn. They want kids to improve. I think that it would be unreasonable to think that they don't, right? So why specifically do you think teachers' unions should be barred from funding campaigns? We can look at San Diego Unified has passed $11 billion in bond measures. Why don't we ban construction companies from funding campaigns? Why don't we overturn Citizens United and completely redo campaign finance? I mean, why specifically do you think teachers?
Yeah, and I think you have to distinguish teachers from the teachers' unions, right? Is that the teachers' unions exist to benefit adults. If the teachers' union said that all we want to do is benefit kids, you don't need a teachers' union. That's what the school board does. So the teachers' unions exist. Their purpose is to benefit adults, despite them trying to claim otherwise when they're campaigning. But the teachers want to teach. It's the teachers' unions that represent the interests of the adults and make sure that the adults get paid well and the adults get certain benefits. But for every $10,000 raise that you give to every single teacher in a school district because it's Me Too raises that are just based on oh well, we're just going to give you a raise just because we got funding, that takes away from being able to hire more teachers, to reduce class sizes, or implement new curriculum. So that's the distinction here that we're trying to say, is that we want the teachers' unions to be prohibited from influencing the decisions that the school board is making that should be in the best interest of the students. And it's a great question on the bond measures as well. I would probably agree, is that we don't want the people who are going to benefit from the bond measures to be influencing who's sitting on the school board and then deciding who gets that money for the bond measure, which has nothing to do with instruction. It just has to do with facilities.
So David, I think that your solution is fascinating. Ultimately, it boils down to kind of following Indiana's lead, which is something you don't often hear a Californian saying. Following Indiana's lead and creating basically what is these 3 graduation pathways that allow kids to have the opportunity to enlist in the military, enroll in a public college. There are many public colleges in which, if you get this enrollment seal, you are automatically guaranteed entry, or to get this employment seal that guarantees you a job at different companies within Indiana. Like you said, this exists in many European countries. My stepdad's French. Thank God he moved over here. He would be a plumber or something. He's a sweet guy, but not necessarily a college material. And so one of the questions that I always think about when it comes to stuff like this, I mean, how do you avoid tracking? Tracking is something that for a long time has been kind of the scourge of schools, right? Tracking is essentially when we start to funnel kids into different pathways depending on their perceived ability, their perceived intelligence. And very, very, very quickly, this can devolve into essentially racism, into moving, Black or brown or poor kids into like non-specialized classes, non-honors classes. I mean, how would you propose to combat that in the context of your solution?
Well, first, your dad would make 6 figures and be very happy, I think.
I know, yeah. He works for the county now, so he'd probably be a plumber.
The reason that we start early is because just that. We don't want kids to foreclose on ideas about their future too young, which is why solutions like Naviance or Zello, these test and tell career like software programs are malpractice. In Cajon Valley, kids try on civil engineering, construction, scientist, theme park engineer, in first grade, and they can tell you about those careers. And at the end of the year, they reflect on all jobs and say, this one's most like me, This one's least like me. In second grade, it's a whole new suite of careers based on the interest of the RIASEC, which is a vocation typology. And so by the time they've had 8th grade, they've had 56 career experiences to unpack their strengths, interest, and value. And the biggest one there is interest. So there's this, I think there's this mindset that there's college or there's skilled labor for those that can't. That's a wrong mindset. Kids that have natural, hands-on ability, they're skilled, they like to work outdoors in different environments. Maybe that kid should look at developing or become a contractor or work in automotive, not because of how they perform on a standardized test. It's what you're interested in. And the only way that you're going to get that, especially kids in high poverty areas, are exposure in school. They don't have the uncle that's going to say, hey, come and spend a week with me at Qualcomm. Or let's go down and take a trip and see what it's like in marine biology. They won't have those opportunities. So you have to build that into the school system starting in kindergarten, expose kids to everything. And especially with Camp Pendleton, Miramar, and the naval base here, the civilian and non-civilian jobs, admirals have told me, you guys don't show your kids the most important work in our country. And they don't have to carry a rifle if they don't want to, but they can serve their country. Same with public service. Fire, police, public works, those jobs we don't show what we do in Cajon Valley, but as a nation, we stigmatize those things. So I think the equalizer is to give kids exposure to everything and then let them decide for themselves by being employed, by earning high school credit, by earning college credit starting sophomore year, every kid.
Richard, I want you to respond to Scott's concept. You're a labor guy. You've long been involved with labor, and he took some pretty direct shots at you. So I want to give you an opportunity to respond, and I want to give you an opportunity to, if you feel you should, argue why you think labor should have a place at the table when it comes to campaigns.
Yeah, I mean, Scott's a good guy, but the reason we disagree on everything is because you're wrong about everything. And starting and what you're not wrong about is the thing that really motivates you, which is you keep losing. So the reason that your biggest problem, the reason you want to eliminate the voice of teachers from school board elections is because voters agree with teachers. That's why I've won 5 elections, because I'm proud to run with the support of the teachers union. And the voters see that and they say, I'm going to vote for somebody that has the support of teachers. So if you don't like the results of elections, of course, do what Donald Trump does. Try to change the rules. Try to eliminate people from being actually able to participate in the democratic process. And you also keep losing when you make this argument that there's this distinction between the teachers union and teachers. Teachers unions make their decisions through a democratic process where their members get to participate and vote. And the results of those decisions are what drives teachers unions, and they're supported by their own educators. So, why should teachers have a voice in what happens to our public education system? That's an answer that's pretty obvious, to voters in California. And if we take the voice of teachers and other educators out of the process where we make decisions, guess who gets to dominate that process? And it's the people who have been coming after our public schools for decades and want to disinvest and want to privatize, and frankly, now want to attack our students, our families, our schools by spending 10 times more on immigration enforcement than they do on special education, which is the number one responsibility of the federal government. If we want those types of decisions to dominate our politics and to dominate who gets to decide what happens to our public schools, do what Scott says, take the voice of teachers out of our decisions.
Scott, I have to give you an opportunity to answer. Are you wrong about everything?
Yeah. So here's what I would say to that is, if Richard keeps winning elections, then he's winning and the teachers are winning, but who's losing? our students are losing, our public schools are losing, right? And so, voters may be, they may be blinded by the idea that, the teacher, and I did this too. I voted for the incumbent in my election before I ran against her. I voted for her in 2018 because I said, oh, she's endorsed by the teachers union. So why wouldn't I vote for whoever the teachers support? And I think that's the attitude of most voters. They believe that if the teachers union is endorsing a candidate, that means that they're representing the best interests of the teachers, and that must mean that that's the best what's in the best interests of the students. That's where the disconnect is, right? Is that, what we see is every time Richard wins an election, kids lose. Kids are leaving the school district. Performances are going down. San Diego Unified has suffered massive, disenrollment. And the scores have gone down as a result and have been going down, right? And so that's what you see is that, even though there's a disconnect because parents believe that their kids are doing well because the state scores, look good to them and they're told that they look good, or they just have no idea what the scores are. The biggest disconnect in Carlsbad Unified is that, we graduate 95% of our high school seniors, but at Carlsbad High School, only 43% of them, of the seniors, are proficient in math. Now, I guarantee you, if you went out and asked, 100 parents, maybe 2 of them would even know that statistic. So that's where the disconnect is that, the teachers unions are electing people who are representing the interests of the teachers, and those teachers are winning. Richard is winning. But in the process, they are ruining public education. And so what we need to get back to is having people on the school boards who represent the interests of parents and the interests of students and the interest of improving outcomes and ensuring that every single child is prepared for any career. I love what David's doing, but it shouldn't be an either or. It should be an and. We should make sure that if a kid is going to go into any career or go to college, that they're at least able to read, right? Because it doesn't matter what career you're going to be in. If if you're a welder, you need to be able to read the instructions, right? If you're, doing accounting, you don't necessarily have to go to college, but you got to be able to do some math, right? So, I just listened to a seminar of, a presentation by the superintendent of Miracosta College, the community college. And what she said is that, the colleges have transitioned into a lifetime of learning, that, no one is going to be stuck in a career either by choice or, not by choice for the rest of their lives. We're going to be continually transitioning and going from one job to another. And that means that you need to be prepared to work and learn, and you need to be prepared to go back to school. And so if you don't have the critical thinking skills, if you don't have basic literacy and basic math skills and a basic understanding of governance and civics, you're not going to succeed in any job you do. So I love, doing jobs at, kindergarten and helping kids understand what careers they might need. But by the time they get to 30, AI might replace their job and they may have to go back to school. So then what are you going to do, right? You need to have a basic understanding of that. So that maybe answers a little bit of both questions.
Sure. Yeah. David, I want to press you on this because reinventing the public school system sounds incredible. I think that there are a lot of people who feel that the system hasn't functioned how it should. And I think it's especially true when we look at the reality of the fact that so many kids are graduating with debt from college, are kind of stuck in this, mired in this world where they're being sold certain jobs. I think there was a great daily episode recently about coding, right? We were all convinced that coding was the next big thing. And now kids are graduating with debt from, their coding degrees, and they're graduating into a workplace environment that is very inhospitable. Now, how do you effectively reinvent the landscape of public education without the money to do so?
Well, that's where I think, we didn't get any extra money to do the innovations that we did. So to disagree with Richard, we don't need more money, said no superintendent ever. But money will not solve the root cause. And I think that the root cause showed by Tim Knowles, Carnegie Foundation, Laura Slover, ETS, who has developed all the standardized testing systems, they're reinventing their whole system because they realize it's misaligned with workforce. It's not preparing kids. And to your point about like welding, yes, the welder needs to read the instructions, and any welder will pick up a welding guide and read thoroughly and speak about it. Have the welder pick up Shakespeare? Maybe not. Have an English professor pick up the welding guide, may not make sense of it, because at the end of the day, the standardized tests are basically a vocabulary test. And the vocabulary kids need to know should be based on what they're going to be doing in their future. Some kids should study Shakespeare and literature that are going to be orators and attorneys and that need that skill set. If you're going to be in construction, you should be reading about things that are going to be important to you in that industry. So literacy, right? But I think that outcomes and assessments. So currently in play right now at the federal level is the learner employment record. And Gavin Newsom's talked about a cradle to career. I think it's kind of like that high-speed highway that's never going to happen until Richard gets superintendent. But
I'm not dealing with
But the learner employment record starts where kids are in elementary school. It measures their skills. And then when they leave, it measures where they are. Are they gainfully employed? Did they, take out a loan? Are they in default? And the idea there is there should be an alumni network in every school district so that when kids leave, if they don't launch, they can come back and be helped and supported. I think we're really excited about getting kids to exit, to graduate, to get into, and then we're done with them. The school system should really take care of the kid, for the rest of the life in a community type of organization.
We've heard a lot about standardized test scores. I think that there is a lot of disagreement about their utility. So yesterday we had State Superintendent Tony Thurmond come to town and visit Burbank Elementary in Richard's sub-district in Barrio Logan. He said something interesting about a test score that I think sums up where a lot of folks, particularly in sort of Richard's train of thought, are with test scores. Kids are more than a test score. And there are many factors that go into how students perform, but we also know that this is our one measure that allows us to know how one student is doing in comparison to their same grade peers. So I want to dig in on test scores a bit. It seems like all three of you have a bit of a different perspective on it. I mean, when we're talking about ensuring that education is excellent for all kids, there aren't many ways that we can decide that in real time. Test scores seem like one of them. What do you think the utility of test scores are? What do you think, is there a metric that we should be using that's more useful?
Yeah. And so we need metrics and we need to be measuring our progress. We need to be doing that. And there needs to be accountability in the system, because if there's not, we're just floundering. But the idea that the metric that we're going to be using is that once a year postmortem, so a kid takes a test at the end of the school year, the educators don't even have access to the results of that testing, that, they have no idea how to take that data and make it useful in terms of working with students. So we see more and more, and certainly in San Diego Unified, how do we have benchmark assessments? How are we looking over, the course of a year, how students are doing? But that, Jacob, that's about literacy and math. So our school district, our board has set 4 goals. We want to see growth in literacy, growth in math. Wellness is our number 1 goal. So at Burbank yesterday, we've got a literacy resource teacher who's there and is part of the team that is helping, the improvement that we're seeing in Burbank students. But that literacy resource teacher, what she talked about was, I've got to get to know our kids. I've got to get to know their families. Our kids are coming in with a lot of different, stresses that are coming from the community. We need to understand that. We need to create a space where students feel like they're cared about and that they're part of a community. And when we do that, now we can start to do some work, on literacy and math. And there's ways to measure wellness in a classroom. We're working with San Diego State. We're working with an organization called Wellness Together in developing a wellness index that is looking at different ways of, are our students physically healthy? Are our students mentally healthy? Do our students feel connected to a community at school? And do our students feel like they are contributors, that they've got something to bring to make the community better? Not to put you on the spot, Samuel, but we've got an amazing chavista sitting right here, a 10th grader at East Village High School. This guy, a couple of years ago when he was an 8th grader at Roosevelt Middle School, we were going through, a pink slip process in our district. He organized his entire community to come down and march on me, and we saved those teachers' jobs. And that's about a sense of Samuel, not just as somebody who other people are going to tell him whether he is doing well or not doing well. Samuel is a leader himself, right now. And that's part of, wellness and creating that environment in our schools. And the idea that we can't come up with ways of knowing if we're making progress around all the factors that, David talked about. So then we have to reduce everything down to once a year standardized tests. I think we've got people in this state that are a lot smarter than that, who we want to engage in this process of, if we know something's important, and now the question for the school system is, how do we know if we're doing it well? We've got people all over the state that can work with us and help develop those metrics. And if they take a little bit more time and they're a little bit more nuanced, then again, these, once a year standardized tests, well, that's what it means to have an educated society, that we can actually do the hard things and understand the complicated things because they're the right things.
All right, Scott, what do you think?
Yeah, I think Richard needs to be careful, being too positive about standardized testing if he wants the CTA to endorse him for state superintendent, because they have an entire website that's set up to encourage parents to opt their students out of standardized testing. They don't like standardized testing because it is that universal metric that allows us to determine if a student is doing well in one school in comparison to students in another school, in another state, in a rich school district versus a poor school district, based on different types of, education and different skill sets, right? So what we need is actually more standardized testing, because, the example that we have in the state of California right now with what's called the SBAC is that you're only giving a standardized test to a high school student in 8th grade and then at the end of their 11th grade year. So there's a 3-year gap where you don't know how a student is doing in English or in math or even in science. And by the time you find out how that 11th grader is doing when they take a test in May, you get those scores now. Right? So that student, you've now realized, oh, you know what? The student is not proficient in math, has no ability to catch up in the next 7 months before they graduate. Well, what do? We don't hold those kids back. They just graduate. So what we need, and this is what Carlsbad Unified was doing until the scores got so low during the pandemic that our union-backed school board got rid of the test. We had mid-year assessments, star assessments. So they get an assessment at the beginning of the year, they get an assessment in the middle of the year, then they get an assessment at the end of the year to see how they're doing throughout the year, right? So we don't need to rely on a standardized test that I agree, is not ideal because we don't give it very often. We need to give more tests throughout the year, and we switched. We actually used a UCSD model for math that provides, even more specific assessments based on the actual class that a student is taking. So what we need is better standardized testing, not to get rid of it altogether.
All right, David, what do you think?
I don't disagree with that. I think measuring growth is the way to go. So prior to coming to Cajon Valley, I was the assistant superintendent in Encinitas Union School District. All 9 schools are blue ribbon schools. Some of the top performing students, according to test scores in the state. The kids were reading before they started kindergarten. So when we looked at it, are they scoring advanced because of what we're doing in school? Because of the curriculum? Let's measure growth. Let's measure how they read when they start school in September and then where they are in April. And it changed the way we looked at everything. So looking at growth is important. But the test scores, both in Richmond and in Encinitas, were irrelevant. Mm-hmm. It's about growth. And it's, again, because I've studied it, it's a vocabulary test. Mm-hmm. And even the math test, it's not computation anymore. It's not 54 times 73. It's you walk into a PET score and there's 5 Dachshunds here, and there's 2 concerned customers over here. There's 1 happy customer there. The happy customer wants 5 of these. That's what the math test, it's a vocabulary test. So I just think that what Carnegie and ETS are doing, they're now having AI interact with students on their prototype that's going to talk to kids about what they read and engage with them. And based on the conversation, the psychometrics, be able to determine, it's just a whole different landscape that's coming and we need to prepare for. I want to say about unions, yes, many school districts failed their community during the pandemic. In Cajon Valley, we reopened our schools in April of 2020. March 13th, we closed our schools. April of 2020, we opened our first school with 2 classrooms, 18 students each, because our family said both of us need to work and our kids are going to be home by themselves. We opened 2 more schools. By June of 2020, all 28 schools were open with 9,500 kids in them. The reason why? Organized labor. DSEA and CVEA, the Teachers Association, they're the ones that came and said, we will show up for our families. So organized labor with good leadership, it can be powerful. So let's not stigmatize unions.
Well, and let me rebut that really quick, because the same reason that what he's admitting is that it is labor that's making that decision, right? So in their case, labor said, yeah, let's reopen schools because our community is made up of working families. We need those families. They're essential workers. They have to go to work. The kids have to go somewhere. So we want to reopen, right? But in other communities, like in Carlsbad and San Diego Unified, labor said, nope, we're not going to reopen. Doesn't matter what the cost. Now, in our case, in Carlsbad Unified, they took a vote. 62% of the teachers voted to reopen the schools and to push the reopen the schools. The union leaders said, well, no, sorry, we're not doing that because we got orders from up top in Sacramento and we're keeping the schools closed. So that's the disconnect, is that labor has too much power. They helped reopen the schools there. They prevented our schools from reopening. And that's the problem, is we should not have labor making the decisions. We should have the community making the decisions instead of labor.
Okay, so we're going to transition here to some audience questions, starting with our press fellow.
Yes, our first question today will be asked by Wyatt Spencer, an Aaron Price Fellow. Each year, the Aaron Price Fellows Program selects 40 kind, inquisitive, open-minded ninth graders from a pool of 300 applicants for a 3-year journey. They go behind the scenes to see how cities function, explore the role of community members in shaping society, and develop empathy and skills for navigating a diverse world. The program is a high school leadership experience started in 1991 by the Price family, founders of Price Club and Price Farm. The mission of Aaron Price Fellows Program is to prepare a highly motivated and diverse group of San Diego public high school students to be responsible, engaged, and caring members of their community. Today, there are over 1,000 Aaron Price Fellows, alumni, with 500 locally carrying out the mission of the program by making a difference in their families, careers, and communities. Wyatt, do you want to come up and ask a question?
Hi, everybody. My name is Wyatt Spencer. I'm a 12th grader at San Diego High. I want to thank you all for taking your time and talking with us today, and for the Voice of San Diego for hosting this event. You guys have all mentioned how policy and how decision-making is so important in education. What I haven't heard yet is about history and curriculum. I'm wondering in how a very volatile and rapidly changing political climate, how we can ensure that history and the way we portray history remains unbiased of partisan beliefs, and how we can show marginalized communities not only through the eyes of the oppressor, but in a way that makes marginalized communities feel represented and heard.
Thank you, Wyatt. So the Aaron Price Fellows is such a great partner with us in our school district. Are both of our current student board members Aaron Price Fellows? I know Alina is. Most of our student board members, right, who are elected by our peers are, coming out of the Aaron Price Fellowship. We've got the Chavez clubs. We've got so many different people in our community who are investing in the leadership of our young people. So you can actually have a voice in our decision making now. It's not, we want to prepare you to lead in the future. We want you to be leading now. And Wyatt's question is something that I think is so critical right now. Our district made ethnic studies a graduation requirement before the state law. establish that. We didn't wait for funding. Now, when the legislature and governor have decided not to fund ethnic studies, we're not backing off. We're continuing to fund ethnic studies, and we're expanding the program. And that's because we know that young people demand an honest conversation about the world that they're in and how we got to this place in this world. And if we are, and it's, history is what you specifically asked about, Wyatt, but I think it's literature. I think it's across the board in our curriculum. If young people don't see themselves in what's being taught and how it's being taught, and having an opportunity to connect what you're learning in school to what you're experiencing in your community, young people tune out of that, and they know, when something's not the truth. And when we invest in curriculum that young people see themselves in and allow to actually grapple with, the most difficult questions in our past and in our present, young people do really well. Attendance improves, grades improve, but more importantly than that, students' sense of their ability to shape the world in the future becomes stronger. So the more that we can do what Wyatt is suggesting, which is to have honest conversations, and again, the people who right now are threatening our public schools in California and saying, we're going to take your funding away if you have honest conversations about our history in your schools. Those are the people who their mission in life is to protect their own privilege. And that comes from a place of racism, and it comes from a place of wanting to deny opportunity to our young people. And so we just need to continue to reject, that attempt to, basically teach dishonestly to our students, about our history and about our present. So the more that we can do what Wyatt suggests, the better off we're going to be. And the more that we listen to student leaders like Wyatt, the better off we're going to be.
So I'm going to go through here and ask each one of our panelists a question from Slido. I'm going to sort of adjust some of these questions, but
Can we answer the question too, though?
Sure. Would you like to?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
That's okay. And I'll try and make it quick if we're running out of time. I just had my son just graduated from high school. And if you asked him, is he allowed to have an honest conversation in his classrooms? He would say, absolutely not. That what you see in the classroom today is you see one perspective taught, and you're not allowed to disagree with that perspective. Now, it doesn't, I don't really care which perspective it is. I'm a policy wonk. I want everybody to write this down. Write down Board Policy 6144 and go look it up. It's called the Controversial Subjects Policy. And it requires that any classroom, if they're going to present a controversial subject, you have to present both sides of the topic, and you have to allow a student to take either side and provide information that supports and disagrees with both sides. So what I don't know if that's what your, high school is like, and you don't have to answer now, but in most cases, when I talk to students, you're not allowed to disagree with the perspective that's being taught. Ethnic studies is the perfect example of the failure of our education system to teach both sides of an issue, because what the ethnic studies, proponents decided is that they don't like the version of history that's being taught. So they're going to have a separate class that's required that only teaches their alternate version of history instead of the version that's being taught. What we should be doing is teaching both in history, right? So if you want to teach different perspectives on history, put it all in a history class and let the teacher present both sides. Let the students, especially in a high school class, let them debate some of these topics, right? But right now what we're seeing is only one perspective provided instead of both. And I think that's the real failure. We talk about ethnic studies. The state legislature just unanimously voted on a measure to make sure that anti-Semitism is not being pushed in our schools. It was unanimously voted, not a single vote against it in the state legislature. There's only one group that opposes it. That's the California Teachers Association.
Real quick, so I think the California framework for history, social studies is pretty good. So in K2, kids learn about the local community. In third grade, they learn about the Kumeyaay Indians. Fourth grade, California history. Then it goes to fifth and eighth grade, United States. The problem is the history book in 1960 and 2025, there's that much more content. So I think to answer your question is rather than have facts, data, and like periods, we should give students projects where they apply what they can learn from a certain time period and create things that will be more meaningful to you, but allow you to tackle a broad time period from an authentic perspective.
Okay, so I'm going to go through here. We're going to ask you to be real quick with these answers, okay? We still have to get through voting. So Scott, I'm going to start with you. How do we ensure that we have educators who are qualified to implement the programs that we've heard today and who are paid competitive and fair wages?
Yeah, and I think I touched on that in my presentation already, so I'll just stick with that, which is we need to switch to a system of merit-based pay. We need to pay teachers based on their ability to teach and based on their ability to learn. And we've seen, evidence, like I said, there's 25 states out there that are shifting to this model. We have data from Houston and from Wisconsin and from all these other states that when you switch to merit-based pay, instead of just giving every single teacher a raise, that motivates teachers to do better and to teach better. And then we can give bonuses to teacher. We give them a $10,000 bonus to go teach the underserved kids in the Mountain Empire, right? So that's what I'm saying. We need to motivate the best teachers to go and teach the students who struggle the most.
David, it's no secret that your board meetings have been quite interesting in recent years. Like many school districts across the state and the country, there's been no shortage of animosity, both from board members and from parents. So I think this question is interesting for you. How do you balance the needs of students and teachers against attacks by parents and politicians who think they know better than educators?
We have to protect them from it. I think that identifying when a trustee has a fiduciary lens and wants the best interest for the community is important. When it's not, it's part of my job and the board's job to help cultivate that and build that in terms of, the type of team we want from a governance group. But there are bad players. And so there are two members of my board that have publicly stated that they want to terminate me. And where I disagree with Scott here is not only should unions play an active role in board campaigns, but I'm going to play an active role in my board race this year. I'm good for my school district. And if I want to stay and keep my job, which I love, and I love my community, I'm going to have to do things to make sure that I stay there. And if it's combating people that want to get rid of me, I think that's, all bets are off.
All right, Richard, the federal administration is defunding many programs to support students. How would you deal with this as California State Superintendent?
A few different ways. So first of all, California has been leading the way. Every threat, which is coming from this administration, which by the way comes like 2 or 3 times a week, we sue. And we lead coalitions of other states across the country, and we're winning most of those lawsuits. And so when they illegally withhold money because they're threatening us, when they're trying to, force their agenda on our schools, we're winning in the courts, and we've got to continue to do that. Number 2, we have to pass Prop 50. We cannot continue to have a Congress that's just going to roll over and let Donald Trump do whatever he wants to our schools. So if we care about public education throughout this country and including here in California, we have to get together. We've got to pass Prop 50, and we need a different Congress. And number 3, the main source of threat that Trump uses is federal funding for schools, which by the way is paltry. It's less than 10% of the funding that comes for our public schools. But if Donald Trump is going to say, I'm going to hold back your funding unless you create a 2-tiered system, a second-class system for immigrant students, unless you discriminate against our LGBTQ students, what we have to do is we have to say, you know what? Then we're going to go and get that money ourselves in California. And there are some people in this state that are getting a windfall from Donald Trump's tax cuts, and we're going to come and we're going to get it back. And so if you're going to try to use funding as a way to attack us, by the way, we send $100 billion back more to the federal government than we get back in return. So it's Californians that are actually funding the federal government, paying for those salaries. And it's time that we go and bring that money back home. And we're not going to let him leverage funding as a threat to attack our kids.
Okay, with that, you're going to do more little lightning round. I want to bring it back to each of the solutions you posed. I want you to summarize it very quickly and tell the audience why it is a better solution than what the other two panelists have proposed. And I want you specifically to engage with what the other two panelists have proposed and tell us why, even if you agree, as clearly Richard and David do with each other's solutions, why this one will be the most efficacious. We're going to do this real quickly. I'll give you each a minute. Let's start with you, Richard.
David's solutions, so much of it is about innovation and changing the way that we do things. And I completely respect that, but it does require more funding. So I'll give you an example. My son went to a district-run school called the Met that's on the Mesa College campus and for high school. And all of the students go to school 3 days a week, but then they're out doing internships 2 days a week. That requires a full-time person at that school to identify the internship opportunities and to work with kids to know, where those opportunities would make the most sense. So if we're going to take to scale every high school student having an opportunity to go out and do internships, we're going to need people, who make that system work. And to David's point, if we're going to do paid internships, which we absolutely should be about, kids who have to support their families, if they're able to go out in the world and do something that they love, they shouldn't have to get a second job on top of that. But if we're going to have paid internships, we need funding. So to do the great things and to take to scale what David is laying out will require more funding, and we've got the money in California and we should go get it.
All right, Scott, you're up.
Yeah, and so obviously the big distinction here is we've had more funding, right? We've been funding our California schools at massive amounts for the past 2 decades, increasing the amount of funding. We have not seen any improvement in those results. And in fact, we saw how far backwards we went 5 years ago when we just decided to throw away the entire purpose of public education in the first place. So there's no reason to just dump more money unless we have people making decisions that are in the best interest of students. So again, that's why my proposal is the only one that provides a global paradigm shift for school boards across the state that would ensure that the people who are sitting on our school boards represent the interests of students and not the interests of adults. And so that's really the bottom line of it. And the data really shows that that does work when it's been done. And that is the best way to improve education for every single student in the state of California.
All right, David.
Vote
you're
for
up.
David. Actually, my solution works is because it's already working in other places. So in Switzerland, in Finland, in Norway, in Germany, in Japan, these types of systems where kids are prepared for vocation and career early work. And the things that's different there is businesses and industry participate. What's necessary here in San Diego is for our local businesses, our military, and our higher ed institutions with philanthropy to collaborate. We're working in silos here, and we have so much wealth and ability if we just put our toys in the middle and played a different game. And in the United States, Indiana, Colorado, parts of Texas, Rhode Island, there are other states that are using these successfully already. It's not a new thing. It's just applying something that's working to California.
All right, everybody, thank you so much for coming. Please give our panel a round of applause.